Hi, welcome to Growth Marketing Chat. Today I'm here with Kathleen Booth. She's the Vice President of Marketing at KATHLEEN.io, and we're really lucky to have her here with us today. Kathleen, thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having me on the show, Caroline.
So I always like to ask my guests what they wanted to do when they were a kid, what they wanted to do when they grew up. So what was your dream as a kid?
Oh, so when I was really little, I wanted to be a famous actress. But as I then transitioned into, I think, middle and high school, I became very much like a social activist, and I wanted to change the world. And actually, it was around the time that apartheid was a thing in South Africa, and so it led me to then go to college and study political science in the hopes of making the world a better place for everybody.
Got it. And so what led you to marketing?
Ah, so I did go to college for political science, as I mentioned, and I started doing a graduate degree in international politics. And about halfway through that, the school that I was at, which was George Washington University in Washington, D.C., allowed existing graduate students to do a second degree
Mm-hmm.
without having to reapply because they would look at your existing track record. And so I, at the time, just remember thinking, I need a degree that's going to make it easier to find a job. And so I did an MBA, and I happened to concentrate in marketing in my MBA. And that eventually led me to start my agency and pursue a career in marketing.
Awesome. Awesome. So when we started to chat, you sent me a video, and I had this amazing revelation that you can learn about marketing while trying to replace your front door, and it was a fantastic story, and I would love to hear it again.
Sure. So I self can, admittedly am kind of addicted to HGTV. And I think it started when I was having my son and I was stuck at home nursing my
Mm-hmm.
baby, and I just would sit and watch TV while I did that. And I didn't want to, watch soap operas or anything like that. And so I watched HGTV and I think the Cooking Channel. And in more recent years, one of the shows that I've really enjoyed was Fixer Upper with Chip and Joanna Gaines. And um, I remember I would watch it, and it would just make me look around my own house and think, oh my gosh, there's so much I want to change, right? I would start to
Mm-hmm.
see everything in a new way. And eventually I got my husband watching it with me. And one of the things that I fixated on was our front door at the time, which I did not like. And it was kind of cracked and needed replacing. And so these shows make it look like you can just replace everything in a few minutes, and it takes no time. And I
Right.
came up with this idea. We could go to the architectural salvage place and do it ourselves, which we did. But it, long story short, it turned into a big nightmare. It all ended well because we have a front door that I love, but it was a lot more time consuming and really hard work and more expensive than I thought. But it kind of it was the tipping off point to me recognizing that my interest in Fixer Upper had transitioned into something else. And like I started noticing when I would go to Target and I would see the Magnolia Home store there, which was Chip and Joanna Gaines's store in Target, that I would want to buy things at it. And
Mm-hmm.
I would see her magazine on the shelf at a store and I'd want to read it. And I became more interested in, they started a paint line, and they started selling a line of rugs. And I was following all of this and realizing, wow, this is the opposite of how we usually think about marketing, in the sense that traditionally with marketing, we have a product and then we try to go find an audience and sell to it. And what in this case, Chip and Joanna Gaines did, but there's lots of examples of people doing it and companies doing it, is they found an audience and then they went and sold products to that audience, which is so that it flips everything on its head. And it's really what media companies have always done, where they build the audience, and in some senses the audience itself is the product, but it's also a potential avenue for monetization. And so if you're able to build a large audience that is highly engaged, that really has a strong brand affinity, then you have really built a platform onto which you can sell almost anything, as long as it's related to that audience. And a great
Right.
example of that is Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop. She started out as a blogger, and now she is an e-commerce behemoth who sells lots of different types of products to her audience, which is just ready and willing to gobble it up.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's really powerful to think of it this way. And once you start thinking about it, it's like I had like 10 examples pop up in my head that I'm like, oh, and now like I buy all these things from like, I have all the Jamie Oliver cookbooks because one day I got up in the morning and I found Jamie Oliver's Italy on TV and I fell in love with it and then just bought all the Jamie Oliver cookbooks. And like there are tons and tons of examples like this. It's so powerful.
Yeah. And there are more, certainly there are a lot of examples along those lines of people who began as influencers and then created businesses around their audiences. But there are also now some more interesting examples cropping up of businesses that are seeing this. And it doesn't necessarily have to happen chronologically where you have the audience and then you sell the product, right? But that you get the concept behind it. But if you look at what's happened in recent years with, for example, HubSpot acquiring the Hustle newsletter. The Hustle literally just started as a newsletter, and it is a newsletter first business model. And HubSpot recognized that if it wanted to continue to grow at the pace that it had, it needed a bigger audience, and it needed really almost a media-like audience that was coming back to it every day or every week for information, not just when the person needed a marketing automation platform or a CRM. It's a much bigger community play. And then you have a venture capital firm like Andreessen Horowitz, which is creating a separate business unit that's just a media business. And there are so many more examples like this.
Yeah.
And growing.
Yeah. Another one that comes to mind is the Motley Fool. They have you're right, like it's not just content, right? It is a media company. They think about their content as media, and it makes all the difference.
Yeah, and at the heart of it, the goal is really to do the same thing that a traditional publisher does, which is to build a habit with your audience, to get them to make your media a part of their daily or weekly life, to keep coming back to you. And in doing so, what you're doing is building a platform that you could eventually monetize. Like a lot of these companies monetize their marketing by selling native content sponsorships or newsletter sponsorships or creating events that they charge for. So there's the possibility of making marketing into a profit center, which is pretty mind-blowing when you think about it, because as marketers, our budgets are always under attack. But if we can say we're a profit center, all of a sudden you're creating a springboard from which to add budget, not have it taken away. But it's also just really a way to stay top of mind all of the time, regardless of whether your audience currently has a need or not. And when you're staying top of mind, you create a platform for people to refer you, to generate and stimulate demand where perhaps it wasn't in the first place. And so there are a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah. And something that is really fascinating to me is that a lot of the time when people think about brand and creating brand content, they think about cost and they think about like vanity metrics and that type of stuff, right? And what you're saying is it's totally the opposite, right? It's transforming marketing into a profit center through this not only brand but thought leadership and media building.
Yeah, in fact, I was just listening to a conversation of marketers that I think is really relevant to this conversation that you and I are having, which is that lots of marketers talk about their budget as spend or budget. And really what we're talking about is thinking of marketing as an investment in building out a long-term asset. And if you're approaching marketing in the traditional way, it really is spend and budget because it's short term. It's we will invest in this channel, or not, I shouldn't even say invest. We will spend on this channel. We expect to see this in return, right? And that's why we get in this hamster wheel of always having to prove, that we're getting these leads or we're contributing to pipeline in this way. And we're, that's important. But what I'm suggesting is a longer term perspective where if you look at marketing as an investment in building your own audience, not having to rely on somebody else's audience, like, Facebook or Google or, any other rented platform, LinkedIn. But if you build your own audience that really is coming back to you proactively, that is subscribing to your email newsletter, that is coming to your events, that is joining the community you've built, that is an asset with value that others would be willing to gain access to.
Yeah.
That is an asset that investors value. There's a company called FreightWaves that is a perfect example of this. It is literally in the freight space, which is one of the least sexy industries out there. And they do provide data to the freight space, but at the same time, they started very early investing in building out a media platform where they have almost like a digital publication and newsletters, and they have events, and they've monetized all of it, and they've developed a huge following because they filled a niche that nobody else was paying attention to. And they just got a new round of venture capital, and their valuation was enormous. And the investors talked about how one reason that they invested and gave it that level of valuation was because they saw the income that was coming in basically through their media arm, through their marketing, and recognized that as having value in and of itself, apart from the core product the company sells.
So really, it's thinking about marketing just as you would think about your product, right? When you develop your product, you're not like, well, is this feature gonna bring me money tomorrow, right? You think about, is it gonna build a cohesive, valuable, game-changing product that delivers value to my audience in the long term?
Exactly right. Yes. You think if I'm able to create something that delivers tremendous value to the audience, then pipeline will naturally follow. The sum of the parts is greater than
Yeah.
each individual part. And it's this, you're right. It's the same with marketing. I think unfortunately a lot of marketers think of it as, I am going to create marketing content in service of driving pipeline, which is a very transactional approach, a very short term. Whereas if you think, I am going to create marketing that is so valuable to my audience that they'd be willing to pay to gain access to it, to subscribe, that
Yeah.
forces you to create amazing marketing content that is naturally also going to result in pipeline for you. And you could build all of your traditional funnels on top of that. But that is future proofing your marketing. And then it doesn't matter whether there's a Google algorithm change or Facebook ads platform change. Like, you will not be affected in the same way you would be if you were taking that short-term approach.
Yeah, and in content you really see that, right? The Google algorithm cares about tiny little things, but at the end of the day, if you're delivering really good, powerful value to your audience, they're gonna keep coming back.
Yeah. And in fact, Google does change its algorithm all the time. But actually, what Google is optimizing for is delivering value
Exactly.
to the end user. And so that's the other thing I think marketers do wrong, is they obsess over the items in the algorithm, when in reality, what the algorithm is obsessing over is solving for the end user. And so if you just forget the algorithm and try to solve for the end user, if you align yourself with the goal of the algorithm itself, you don't have to worry about the details as much. It'll take care of itself. And you don't have to worry about algorithm changes, because if you're optimizing for the same thing it is, you'll be 10 steps ahead of it.
Yeah. It's like, don't have a slow site because your users won't like a slow site.
Right.
Not because of Google.
Exactly.
Your users will hate it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was so great. I guess my last question to wrap up is, what are some of the most valuable lessons you've learned in your career?
Oh my goodness. This is such a hard one to answer, because it's like trying to pick your favorite child. There are so many, and they're all so different from one another. Like, I think I'm somebody who has a bias for action. And so I think the biggest thing of all is like learning to understand myself more deeply, and doing, like, I've done a lot of those personality tests, whether it's what's the word? Oh my goodness. Myers-Briggs, or
Right.
yeah, all those types of tests. Learn a DISC. That's the one I was trying to search for. Doing a DISC and learning a high D, right? Becoming super self-aware about what my strengths are and my weaknesses are, and learning to try and recognize that, and recognize when my behavior is helping versus hurting in a certain situation. I think that's so much more powerful than any like individual marketing lesson learned or anything else that I could share. It's just becoming as self-aware as I can be and always looking to grow and improve.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Great. Well, Kathleen, thank you so much for joining today. I really enjoyed this chat, and hopefully our audience will enjoy it too.
This was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.